Hi there. Today I'd like to read a portion anyway of the complaint that Cassie, the artist, who is Casandra Ventura, filed against Sean Combs, Diddy. And they had a relationship for a little bit more than a decade, I believe. Broke up in 2018 and has since recently filed a complaint, a civil lawsuit against Diddy. So I'd like to read that, and it's 35 pages. I will probably break this up into two portions. We'll see how far I get. This is out of the United States District Court, SDNY, and this is a complaint or jury trial demand of Casandra Ventura, the plaintiff, versus defendant Sean Combs, Bad Boy Entertainment, Bad Boy Records, Epic Records, Combs Enterprises, LLC, and Doe Corporations 1 through 10. Heavy trigger warning on this, and you can follow along with me on the screen, or you can just listen to what I'm saying. Plaintiff Casandra Ventura, Ms. Ventura, hereby alleges, as for her complaint against defendant Sean Combs, Mr. Combs, Bad Boy Entertainment, Bad Boy Records, Epic Records, Combs Enterprises, LLC, and Doe Corporations 1 through 10, together defendant corporations, and together with Mr. Combs' defendants, as follows. And the following is the preliminary statement. Sean Combs, defendant, is a rapper and record executive popularly known by his stage names as Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, or Diddy. Mr. Combs came to fame in the early 1990s with his record label, Bad Boy Records. He rose to prominence in the music and entertainment industry over the decades and is regularly referred to as a hip-hop mogul. In 2022, Mr. Combs accepted the Lifetime Achievement Award at the BET Awards. During his acceptance speech, he stated, "I have to give a special shout-out, thank you, love, to the people, thank you, love, to the people that were really there for me." He named a number of people before adding, "and also Cassie for holding me down in the dark times, love." The truth, however, is that Cassie, Ms. Casandra Ventura, was held down by Mr. Combs and endured over a decade of his violent behavior and disturbed demands. For Ms. Ventura, the dark times were those she spent trapped by Mr. Combs in a cycle of abuse, violence, and sex trafficking. Among other violent and awful acts, Mr. Combs raped Ms. Ventura in her own home as she tried to leave him, often punched, beat, kicked, and stomped on Ms. Ventura, resulting in bruises, burst lips, black eyes, and bleeding. Blew up a man's car after he learned that he was romantically interested in Ms. Ventura, forced Ms. Ventura to engage in sex acts with male sex workers while masturbating and filming the encounters, ran out of his apartment with a firearm in pursuit of a rival industry executive whom he learned was nearby, demanded that Ms. Ventura carry his firearm in her purse just to make her uncomfortable and demonstrate how dangerous he is, and introduce Ms. Ventura to a lifestyle of excessive alcohol and substance abuse, and required her to procure illicit prescriptions to satisfy his own addictions. Ms. Ventura met Mr. Combs in 2005 when she was 19 years old and he was 37 years old. He signed her to his record label, Bad Boy Records, and within a few years lured Ms. Ventura into an ostentatious, fast-paced, and drug-fueled lifestyle and into a romantic relationship with him, her boss, one of the most powerful men in the entertainment industry, after a vicious, cruel, and controlling man nearly 2 decades her senior. Ms. Ventura met Mr. Combs in 2005 when she was 19 years old and he was 37 years old. He signed her to his label, Bad Boy Records, and within a few years lured Ms. Ventura into an ostentatious, fast-paced, and drug-fueled lifestyle and into a romantic relationship with him, her boss, one of the most powerful men in the industry, and a vicious, cruel, and controlling man, nearly 2 decades her senior. Mr. Combs asserted complete control over Ms. Ventura's personal and professional life, thereby ensuring her inability to escape his hold. He provided unprecedented avenues for success for the aspiring artist, but in return demanded obedience, loyalty, and silence. Throughout their relationship, Mr. Combs was prone to uncontrollable rage, frequently beat Ms. Ventura savagely. These beatings were witnessed by Mr. Combs' staff and employees of Bad Boy Entertainment and Mr. Combs' related business, but no one dared to speak up against their frightening and ferocious boss. Following these episodes of horrific abuse, Mr. Combs would immediately attempt to hide Ms. Ventura and the evidence of his violent rage. He often showered her with gifts following incidents of physical violence, a typical pattern of behavior by serial abusers. In addition to the physical assaults, Mr. Combs frequently reminded Ms. Ventura of his ability to cause serious harm, whether by requiring her to carry his gun in her purse or by blowing up the car of the musician that was romantically interested in Ms. Ventura. Adding insult to injury, Mr. Combs used illegal substances and threats of violence to force Ms. Ventura into repeated, unwanted sexual encounters with male sex workers. Over the years that Mr. Combs abused Ms. Ventura physically and sexually, she again and again tried to escape his tight hold over her life. Every time she did, Mr. Combs' vast network of corporations and affiliated entities found her, and those who worked for Mr. Combs' companies implored her to return to him. Many went as far as to explicitly state that her failure to return to Mr. Combs would hinder her success in the entertainment industry. When she believed that she had finally separated from her longtime abuser, she joined Mr. Combs for a dinner, after which he forced her into her home and raped her while she repeatedly said no and tried to push him away. Ms. Ventura has now fully escaped Mr. Combs, but the harm that the assaults and sexual abuse he caused her to experience for nearly a decade will forever haunt her. She has required intensive medical and psychological care to recover from the trauma that she lived through. She cannot, however, continue to live in silence about what she endured. Mr. Combs remains immensely powerful and immensely dangerous. Ms. Ventura, therefore, seeks justice for the decade of her life that Mr. Combs took away from her with threats of violence, excessive use of drugs, physical and psychological abuse, and sexual slavery. And here's where I will probably abbreviate or not state all of the United States codes and so on. Accordingly, Ms. Ventura brings this action seeking injunctive, declaratory, and monetary relief against defendants in violation of federal sex trafficking laws. Those are the New York State Human Rights Law, the New York City Human Rights Law, the Gender Motivated Violence Act, the New York Services for Victims of Human Trafficking, California Sexual Abuse and Cover-Up Accountability Act, and the California Trafficking Victims Protection Act. Jurisdiction and venue. This court has jurisdiction pursuant to 28 U.S. Code 1331 and 1343 and asserts violations of 18 U.S.C. 1591 and therefore raises federal questions regarding the deprivation of plaintiffs' rights. The court has supplemental jurisdiction over plaintiffs' related claims arising under state and city laws. Pursuant to other laws, venue is proper to this court because a substantial part of the events or omissions given to this rise of action, including the unlawful employment practices and intentional and negligent tortious conduct alleged herein, occurred in this district. Parties. Plaintiff Casandra Ventura is a resident of the state of California and the state of Connecticut, and was employed by defendants Bad Boy Records and Bad Boy Entertainment and related entities from 2006 to 2019. At all relevant times herein, Ms. Ventura met the definition of an employee of defendants under all relevant statutes. Defendant Sean Combs, upon information and belief, resides within the state of California. At all relevant times herein, Mr. Combs met the definition of an employer under plaintiff under all relevant statutes. Defendant Bad Boy Entertainment is a music, media, and entertainment company founded by defendant Sean Combs, which includes the record label Bad Boy Records, and at all relevant times, defendant was an employer of plaintiff within the meaning of all applicable statutes. Defendant Bad Boy Records, LLC, is a Delaware limited liability company with a principal place of business located in New York. At all relevant times, defendant was an employer of plaintiff within the meaning of all applicable statutes. Defendant Sean Combs Enterprises is a New York limited liability company. At all relevant times, defendant was an employer of plaintiff within the meaning of all applicable statutes. Defendant Doe Corporations 1 through 10 are corporations and entities affiliated and associated with defendants Sean Combs and the defendant corporations. At all relevant times, defendant Doe Corporations 1 through 10 were employers of plaintiff within the meaning of all applicable statutes. Factual allegations. First, number 1, teenaged Ms. Ventura meets middle-aged Mr. Combs as her career begins. Ms. Ventura and Mr. Combs in late 2005 or early 2006, after Mr. Combs heard Ms. Ventura's first single playing in a club and expressed interest in signing her to his label, Bad Boy Records. At this time, Ms. Ventura was 19 years old. Mr. Combs was 37 years old. Within months, in February 2006, Ms. Ventura signed a 10-album deal with Mr. Combs' record label. Ms. Ventura's first album, Cassie, was released in August 2006, debuting at number 4 on the U.S. Billboard charts of 200. To promote the album, Ms. Ventura made television appearances on MTV's Total Request Live and BET's 106 and Park. Ms. Ventura suffered from significant performance anxiety during these performances, and press outlets were highly critical of Ms. Ventura's performances on these shows. Mr. Combs, however, sought to rehabilitate his newly signed talent, telling MTV News the following: "You could hear the nervousness in her voice, and to be honest, I kind of smiled at it because it made me really appreciate what I really loved about her. She's a regular person. It just made me appreciate that she got nervous, and it was kind of cute to me, to be honest. You've got to understand that success for her is coming out of nowhere. It's just so huge, and sometimes everybody handles it differently." While clearly paternalistic in noting that it was cute to somehow show regular Ms. Ventura appeared, Mr. Combs' comments rang true to some extent. Upon signing with Bad Boy Records, Ms. Ventura was quickly thrust into the spotlight and was unfamiliar on how to navigate her new celebrity status. Mr. Combs recognized the glorification of Ms. Ventura's naivete proved to set the groundwork for his manipulative and coercive romantic and sexual relationship with Ms. Ventura, a woman nearly 2 decades his junior. Within a year of signing with Bad Boy Records, Mr. Combs became deeply entrenched in Ms. Ventura's life, almost immediately asserting possession and control over her and inserting himself into all aspects of her career and personal life. In November 2006, Mr. Combs invited Ms. Ventura to perform his song, "Come to Me," along with him at the MTV Europe Music Awards in Copenhagen, Denmark. After rehearsal for this performance, Mr. Combs walked around in a robe with a drink in his hand, flaunting his lavish party lifestyle to his label's newly signed artist. During hair and makeup leading to the performance, Ms. Ventura's hairstylist and Mr. Combs' makeup artist told Ms. Ventura that Mr. Combs was interested in Ms. Ventura. Ms. Ventura shrugged it off and, in fact, expressed disgust given the large age gap between her and the president of her record label. Emphasizing the age and power dynamic early in their working relationship, Mr. Combs positioned himself as a father figure and protector of Ms. Ventura. By way of example, after returning to New York after a trip to Las Vegas, during which she endured a brief hospital stay, Ms. Ventura, who by then was fully healthy, went out to a club with her friends. When Mr. Combs saw her out, he reprimanded her, telling her to go home and take care of herself. At the time, Ms. Ventura thought that her record label was looking out for her well-being and that Mr. Combs had her best interest in mind. Mr. Combs also ensured he was intertwined with Ms. Ventura's personal and social life, for instance, by inviting himself to Ms. Ventura's 21st birthday party in Las Vegas. He also brought along famous musicians and producers, thereby flaunting his celebrity status and influence in front of a young and impressionable Ms. Ventura. Although Mr. Combs knew that Ms. Ventura was in a relationship at the time, and even though he was publicly in a relationship with Kim Porter, Mr. Combs nevertheless pursued Ms. Ventura. At an after-party in a hotel suite following Ms. Ventura's 21st birthday party, Mr. Combs pulled her into a bathroom and forcibly kissed her. Ms. Ventura did not consent to this unwanted contact. She immediately ran out of the bathroom and the hotel suite and cried. She told her best friend at the time about what happened, but was too scared to tell anyone else. At the Video Music Awards the following day, Ms. Ventura's boyfriend at the time joined her and Mr. Combs at the awards ceremony. Mr. Combs became angry, telling Ms. Ventura that the invitation to the awards ceremony was only for her and not for her significant other. Number 2, Mr. Combs lures Ms. Ventura into a relationship. Despite her clear rejection of Mr. Combs' advances, Mr. Combs continued to demand Ms. Ventura spend time with him, including for a weekend at Mr. Combs' residence in Miami and for nights out in New York City. On one particular night in September 2007, Mr. Combs insisted on taking Ms. Ventura out. Ms. Ventura acquiesced, fearing that rejecting Mr. Combs' request would have repercussions for her album deal with Mr. Combs and his company, Bad Boy Records. Mr. Combs picked up Ms. Ventura from her apartment in Manhattan in a blue luxury vehicle. Ms. Ventura was surprised that when she got into the car, Mr. Combs was already inebriated. He handed her a pill and told her to take it. When Ms. Ventura asked what the pill was for, Mr. Combs dismissed her and told her she would like it. She later learned that the pill was ecstasy, something Ms. Ventura had never before tried and did not want to try. This was the first time Mr. Combs got Ms. Ventura high. Mr. Combs then proceeded to drive recklessly at very high speeds down the West Side Highway of Manhattan. Ms. Ventura was very scared, but did not dare to object to Mr. Combs, who appeared drunk, high, and agitated. When Mr. Combs took Ms. Ventura into an upscale lounge in downtown Manhattan, he proceeded to get into an altercation with the security staff, who would not permit Mr. Combs to enter, presumably because he was belligerent. Ms. Ventura decided to go home, but for the remainder of the night, Mr. Combs messaged Ms. Ventura incessantly, complaining that she left him high and alone. In early fall 2007, Mr. Combs flexed his power and influence when he paid a promoter to create a fake flyer for a party hosted by Ms. Ventura. This fake hosted allowed Ms. Ventura to have an excuse to go to Miami, Florida, and to get away from her boyfriend by using the guise of a legitimate event she had to attend. Ms. Ventura was stunned at how easily Mr. Combs was able to recruit others to lie for him. Ms. Ventura was uncomfortable with the fake flyer, but because the request to go to Miami was made by the owner of her record label, and because she was scared to go against her wishes and face repercussions of her nascent career, Ms. Ventura agreed to join Mr. Combs in Florida. During his trip to Miami, Mr. Combs provided Ms. Ventura with copious amounts of drugs. She became more intoxicated than ever before, and her intoxication lasted throughout the weekend trip. As she wanted Mr. Combs to continue to support her career, she felt she could not refuse Mr. Combs' urging to take more drugs. After providing her with drugs, Mr. Combs had sexual intercourse with Ms. Ventura during this trip. Within 2 years of meeting Mr. Combs, Ms. Ventura found herself lured into the immediate circle of her boss, the owner of her record label, and one of the most powerful men in the entertainment industry. Part 3. Mr. Combs exerts control over Ms. Ventura's career and personal life. From the very start of their relationship, Mr. Combs exerted his power and influence over Ms. Ventura. The dynamic was fueled by their nearly 20-year age difference, as well as the relative positions in the music industry, with Mr. Combs considered a music mogul, and Ms. Ventura at the start of her career as an entertainer. Mr. Combs' aggressive and demanding approach to those he worked with made it impossible for anyone to challenge him, and Ms. Ventura soon learned that Mr. Combs insisted on blind loyalty from everyone in his inner circle. Although Ms. Ventura had saved up some earnings from her young modeling career, Mr. Combs' ostentatious display of wealth was intimidating to her. Mr. Combs paid for things with wads of cash and would repeatedly tell Ms. Ventura, "Don't worry about money, I have money." Mr. Combs expensed lavish vacations for him and Ms. Ventura, purchased a car for her, paid for her apartment, and provided her with extensive amounts of designer clothing. Around 2008 or 2009, Mr. Combs began to rent an apartment in Manhattan for Ms. Ventura. The apartment was within walking distance of Mr. Combs' New York residence. He first showed Ms. Ventura the apartment by bringing her there along with the parents. Ms. Ventura's parents were skeptical of the mogul's displays of wealth, but proud of her daughter's newfound success. Around 2010, Mr. Combs similarly paid for an apartment for Ms. Ventura in Los Angeles, which was located about 5 minutes away from his residence. He paid for many of her apartments in California and also purchased a Jaguar for her around 2013 or 2014. All expenses of Ms. Ventura's life were controlled by either Mr. Combs or his management companies. Every event Ms. Ventura attended, from the travel to the makeup and clothing, was paid directly by Mr. Combs and his affiliated companies. Compounding this all-encompassing intrusion into her life, Mr. Combs secured his control over the young and impressionable Ms. Ventura by introducing her to a drug-fueled lifestyle that kept her complacent and compliant. Mr. Combs first introduced Ms. Ventura to opiates around 2008 and would often have pills and other drugs out in the open like candy. Upon information and belief, Mr. Combs had been addicted to prescription painkillers and took ecstasy frequently. At first, Ms. Ventura was given prescriptions that Mr. Combs received from a doctor in Miami. Eventually, when Mr. Combs exhausted his supply of pills, he demanded that Ms. Ventura procure prescriptions from his Miami doctor in her own name. Mr. Combs also became deeply involved in Ms. Ventura's personal life, with his personal staff attending to Ms. Ventura's day-to-day travel and other needs, including medical care. On multiple occasions, Mr. Combs had Ms. Ventura's personal records sent directly to his email address, her personal medical records, For instance, when Ms. Ventura began experiencing memory loss, potentially due to excessive drug use and/or head injuries caused by Mr. Combs' beatings, as described below, her MRI results were provided directly to Mr. Combs. Mr. Combs also repeatedly arranged for his staff to drive Ms. Ventura to certain doctor's appointments. In this way, Mr. Combs exerted ownership over Ms. Ventura. As another example of the ways in which he manipulated Ms. Ventura and ensured obedience, early on in their relationship, he asked Ms. Ventura what she called her grandfather. When Mr. Ventura said that she referred, I think that's incorrect. When Ms. Ventura said that she referred to her grandfather as Pop Pop, Mr. Combs perversely insisted that Ms. Ventura refer to him with that nickname. Section 4. Mr. Combs and Ms. Ventura's relationship becomes violent and abusive. What started as a whirlwind of celebrity meetings and drug and alcohol-fueled parties, however, quickly became frightening and violent. Ms. Ventura was also exposed to the intense violence that had pervaded Mr. Combs' rise to fame. For example, on one occasion when Mr. Combs and Ms. Ventura were using drugs together in his home, one of his security staff barged in and announced that Suge Knight, a longtime rival of Mr. Combs, was spotted at Mel's Drive-In Diner in Los Angeles. Mr. Combs began to get dressed, retrieved multiple guns from a safe, and ran out of his home to where he believed Mr. Knight was dining. Ms. Ventura became terrified and began to cry. On at least 2 occasions, Mr. Combs demanded that Ms. Ventura hold Mr. Combs' gun in her purse. Ms. Ventura had no familiarity with guns and was petrified that the firearm would accidentally go off in her purse. There was no clear reason why Mr. Combs required her to hold his guns, except to reinforce to his young girlfriend that he was violent, powerful, and dangerous. Over the next decade, multiple times each year, Mr. Combs would violently beat Ms. Ventura, leaving bruises on her body. After every instance in which he beat Ms. Ventura, Mr. Combs used his money and power to orchestrate extensive efforts to hide the evidence of his abuse, including by hiding Ms. Ventura in hotels for days at a time to let her bruises heal. And one such instance, after a party with Jay-Z, Mr. Combs beat Ms. Ventura repeatedly in an Escalade, including by kicking and hitting her. He forced her out of the vehicle on Fifth Avenue in New York City. She was eventually able to hail a cab and to get to her apartment in Manhattan, where she cried in fear, realizing there was no one she could tell about what happened at the hands of an incredibly powerful man. She spent the subsequent 3 days hiding in her apartment. In January 2009, after Mr. Combs learned that Ms. Ventura spoke to another music manager at a party in Los Angeles, he became enraged. She had hoped speaking to this manager would allow her to further grow in her career, and that Mr. Combs would be happy for her. But instead, he became extremely angry and pulled her out of the club where the party was taking place. In the car leaving the club, Mr. Combs beat Ms. Ventura, pushing her into a corner of the vehicle and stomping on her face. Mr. Combs' security staff, Roger Bonds, tried to stop the beating, but was unable to de-escalate the situation. When the car arrived at Mr. Combs' residence, Ms. Ventura attempted to run away, but Mr. Combs followed her and proceeded to kick her again in the face. Ms. Ventura was bleeding profusely and was ushered to Mr. Combs' house, where she began to throw up from the violent assault. Upon recognizing the damage he had done and the physical evidence of his abuse, Mr. Combs panicked and forced his staff to bring Ms. Ventura to a hotel suite at the London Hotel in Los Angeles, where she was required to stay for a week. During this stay, as her injuries from the beatings healed, Ms. Ventura began to fully realize that Mr. Combs' tremendously loyal network not only knew about and witnessed his assault, but also these witnesses were not willing to do anything meaningful to stop Mr. Combs' behavior. She recognized that she was powerless, and that reporting Mr. Combs to the authorities would not alter Mr. Combs' status or influence, but would merely give Mr. Combs another excuse to hurt her. While in the hotel, she asked to go home to her parents, but Mr. Combs wouldn't let her leave. She lied to her mother when asked about the online gossip forum that reported the assault. Mr. Combs proceeded to instruct his assistant to purchase excessive amounts of gifts for Ms. Ventura, which were delivered to the hotel room where she remained trapped. Ms. Ventura was terrified, isolated, and unable to see a pathway out Mr. Combs' abusive hold of her life. She found herself becoming numb to the abuse she was experiencing and became entirely beholden to Mr. Combs' demand. She began to blindly follow at his instructions out of fear of again being on the receiving end of a vicious beating. By Mr. Combs' own admission, his relationship with Ms. Ventura was like, quote, Bobby and Whitney, unquote. A clear acknowledgement of the unequal power dynamic and excessive domestic violence that permeated their relationship. From the outside looking in, Ms. Ventura had others referred to her relationship with Mr. Combs as akin to Ike and Tina. Her volatile and abusive partner, who also owned her label and therefore held her future success in his hands, had fully exerted control over every aspect of her life. We now get to section 5, which is Mr. Combs forces Ms. Ventura into sex trafficking. I'm going to stop here, however, and pick back up on the next video. This is a lot. It's a lot to read. Thank you so much for listening and following along with me. Please like and subscribe and get notifications, and you'll receive more content. This is all new to me, so sorry for my mispronunciations and so on. But I appreciate you listening. Thanks. Hi there. Today I'd like to read a portion anyway of the complaint that Cassie, the artist, who is Casandra Ventura, filed against Sean Combs, Diddy. And they had a relationship for a little bit more than a decade, I believe. Broke up in 2018 and has since recently filed a complaint, a civil lawsuit against Diddy. So I'd like to read that, and it's 35 pages. I will probably break this up into 2 portions. We'll see how far I get. This is out of the United States District Court, SDNY, and this is a complaint or jury trial demand of Casandra Ventura, the plaintiff, versus defendant Sean Combs, Bad Boy Entertainment, Bad Boy Records, Epic Records, Combs Enterprises, LLC, and Doe Corporations 1 through 10. Heavy trigger warning on this. And you can follow along with me on the screen, or you can just listen to what I'm saying. Plaintiff Casandra Ventura, Ms. Ventura, hereby alleges, as for her complaint against defendant Sean Combs, Mr. Combs, Bad Boy Entertainment, Bad Boy Records, Epic Records, Combs Enterprises LLC, and Doe Corporations 1 through 10, together defendant corporations, and together with Mr. Combs' defendants, as follows.